to stream to Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Probably the easiest place is going to be to access these live streams is Twitter, and then after the fact on YouTube. I will share them around on Facebook after the fact. But yeah, so I'm gonna start trying to do this more regularly and be more visible again. It's been an amazing journey I've had over the last sort of year. So I just wanted to kind of first restate where I am in life for those who haven't been following. So, you know, basically up until last year, I spent the last decade working in training people in finance. So I would go inside rooms and train CEOs, new hires, in getting their Series 7 license, their Series 24 license, anything you could imagine. But last year, I decided I wanted to make some changes in my life and pursue something that I was a little bit more passionate about, and that was coding. So I went to a General Assembly boot camp to become a full stack developer, where I learned a lot about JavaScript, HTML, CSS, PHP, and at the same time teaching myself Golang, Swift, Python, several other programming languages, because anyone who knows me knows I like to learn stuff. So I did all that, and very smoothly ended up finding a job as a full stack developer with Crossfield Digital, and at the same time being offered a job as an instructor for General Assembly, because they enjoyed many of the videos I made for my fellow students along the course. So I ended up taking both jobs. So I start 2020 with two jobs, and asking myself the question, should I run for re-election as the vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee with all these new responsibilities, a new career, and trying to establish myself in that new career? And I did make the decision to not run for re-election, making that announcement in early February. While being vice chair has been an amazing journey over the last couple of years, I've gotten to travel across the country, been to several state conventions and events in different states, getting to see meeting really awesome activists who are super passionate about creating a world where there's an individual piece, where basically we coexist in a culture of consent, where basically everything is on a sort of voluntary basis, because it brings out the best in each other. When I can't force you to do something, for me to get you to do the things I want, I have to convince you to do it, which means I have to build friendship, community, kinship, respect with you. Okay, so in a free world where everyone's free and you can't compel others, we are sort of induced to have to be better people, because that's the only way to earn consent. Vice versa, in a world of compulsion where we can force others to do things, which is typically what happens when, as government grabs more and more power, it becomes the lever of compulsion. We start seeing the worst in each other, because I no longer need to have you like me to get the things that I want. I can just force you to give me your stuff, to do the things that I think are the right things to do, and civility gets thrown out the window. So in the Libertarian Party, in a world that's so polarized, the world needs that libertarian message more than ever, because the only way for us to return to a place of individual peace and a culture of consent, to a world where basically we don't wake up wondering if the next person I talk to is going to hate me. We need that libertarian flavor. We need that libertarian voice that'll encourage us to focus on persuading each other over compelling each other. So that is and then there is no environment that seems more key and conducive to that than the world of the last several years. One, the polarization. The polarization has really left a vacuum and a desire for the average person for something that's a little bit less, well, divisive, a little bit less hateful. People are just frustrated. They are exhausted. Yes, from a political standpoint, hate works, okay? Because if you can convince 51% of the people who will vote to hate the other 49, you will win an election. And if that doesn't work, if you can just make people frustrated enough that they stay home, then you still can convince the 51% to hate the other 49% that's left to win an election. And that's pretty much how politics is played. That's how the Democrats and Republicans have played for a very long time. That's why you have such horrible turnout, where you have so many people on the sidelines and so many people who just have given up on the system. But the libertarian message can create a world where we're better to each other, where we have an incentive to be better to each other, that makes people want to be active in the world. And that's why In such a polarized world, the libertarian message is so important. But also, just from a practical standpoint, the libertarian message is so important from the angle that the libertarian message is also about being able to do things without having to wait for everybody else to be on the same page. So being able to find solutions at a small scale, whether it's you individually solving problems in your life or you banding together consensually with others to solve problems in your community, and not having to wait for the powers that be to allocate the resources and make the decisions to make things happen. Okay, in a world where I think this year has made it clear on several levels. One, pretty much every state, federal, and local government is pretty broke now. So anything that any Republican and Democrat ever wanted to spend money on is just pretty much just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Okay, we are borrowing an extreme amount of money, and so government is now sort of off the table as a solution, anyways. So in that case, who has a solution absent government? Libertarians. We're the ones who actually think about how do we solve problems without that tool. Okay, we think about how can we, use communities, use businesses, how do incentives between individuals and organizations and governance and all these things interplay with each other, so that way there can be solutions in an environment like the one we have today. Okay, this is the libertarian moment. As much as I wish we weren't in the crisis that we are in now, whether it is the polarization of society or the pandemic that has been COVID-19 and the effect it's had on our economy, on our culture, on everything, it's created this desperate need for what the libertarians have to offer. The desperate need for, again, a culture of consent that's going to encourage us to be better to each other, for that focus on solutions within our communities, within our businesses, within all the other institutions of society, instead of just defaulting to government all the time. This is the moment. Okay, and which is why I am so excited for the National Convention. We'll see what happens in the National Convention. Me and the rest of the LNC will be having a meeting tomorrow where those on the Convention Oversight Committee will kind of give us an update, and we'll discuss sort of and decide what the next action is. I don't have a particular... I always try to walk into a meeting as neutral as possible. I always try to walk into anything as neutral as possible, because I want to walk in and be able to listen to everybody's perspective and everyone's thoughts on the issue before making any kind of decision. Many of you have been messaging me, reaching out to me with your take, and please keep doing so. Okay, the more input I get, the more I have to reflect on, the more I have to think on, and that's always appreciated. But again, I'm not gonna really let myself sort of commit to anything until I've heard everything. That's just sort of the way I am. I don't like to rush to judgment. I don't like to rush to do that. Doesn't mean I don't want to take forever to make a decision, but I want to make sure that it's deliberate, it's thought out, it's thoughtful. And again, I just want to also reiterate how amazing all the people I've met over the last couple of years as vice chair has been, and how much I've appreciated how warm you've all been, the hard work you've all put in, and and also just for having me as your vice chair these last couple of years. It's been an amazing experience. It's going to be really sad to no longer serve in that role, or even serve on the LNC as I focus on some of these other endeavors for the time being. But I will still be involved. Still quite the ardent libertarian. I still care what happens. And that's why, like, when it comes to, like, everyone always wants to know, like, oh, what do you think about the presidential election and whatnot? I mean, as leadership, if I had an opinion, I wouldn't voice it, because I want you guys to make your own decision about who you should nominate as the presidential candidate, as the vice presidential candidate, as chair, vice chair, all that stuff. Although we have some great selections in all these races, it's a pretty exciting thing when I can look at my choices and feel like there's multiple good choices. Okay, that is a reward, that is rewarding, and I love it. But I'm pretty neutral on the presidential race, because the way I always look at it is that it's not the end-all be-all of the libertarian mission. Okay, the work doesn't end based on who we choose, and the work is ongoing despite who we choose. Now, who we choose will determine what opportunities are available, which markets will grow in, lots of different things. But every candidate does provide different opportunities, some costs, some benefits. The delegates will kind of decide what that cost-benefit analysis should look like. I always feel that my role even though I do get a vote as a delegate, and I will vote, and I will make a choice once I've heard sort of everyone's case. But I always see myself as a role, sort of as currently in leadership, as to not necessarily think about who's the best choice, but to think about, regardless of what choice we make, how can we maximize our impact in that choice. Okay, and trust me, that's something I think about, and I play that scenario out with every candidate. Like, okay, if that candidate got chosen, how can we maximize their case, and how can we minimize their threats? In the sense, you know, you do a SWOT analysis. Okay, what are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are the opportunities here? What are the threats? Because no matter, someone's going to be picked, and we can either take advantage of it or be with our arms crossed. So yes, do voice what your preference is. Do make the case for your candidate. But don't forget, there's a larger mission here, which is to spread the libertarian message, to grow the Libertarian Party, so we can create that culture of consent. We can bring the solutions that society needs right now. And I don't want people to lose sight of that. So I just wanted to kind of come out and like say that and reflect a little bit. And hopefully you guys will be hearing more from me. I'll be trying to do these live streams more regularly as there's stuff to say. I mean, there's plenty to say that I haven't said yet, so I'm going to come back to COVID-19 in a moment. But yeah, I'm going to be doing these more regularly. And then I'll also be putting these on my podcast. So if you haven't already subscribed to my podcast, because, you know, what libertarian doesn't have a podcast, right? You know, you can subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, etc. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find the content there. But just sort of, if you just care to hear what I think and whatnot, I think every once in a while I have a novel opinion. You know, I do what I can. But yeah, so a little bit more on this year, because again, I do think it's a year that's uniquely setting us up. And I mean, again, politically we have polarization. Once again, both parties have nominated like the worst candidates possible. So we kind of ended up, it's kind of like 2016 Redux. And then you have the whole COVID-19 situation, which has put a lot of people are very acutely sensitive to what's going on in the world right now. And again, it's a problem. Okay, this is a bad situation where you have an infectious disease, you have people who are very vulnerable to that disease, and you know, there just isn't necessarily what's in place. Now, what always frustrates me with a lot of times in the political discussion is that, you know, people assume that if this problem exists, this must be the solution. So if I don't want that to be the solution, then I must say that this problem doesn't exist. No, there can be a problem. We can all recognize that there is a problem and think that there's different solutions that exist. And even if we disagree on what that solution is, agree that maybe the solution as it has played out hasn't been ideal in many different ways. You know, discussions are robust, discussions are complex. Okay, so I always get a little frustrated when I see people kind of making it too binary, too not nuanced. You know, when we live in such a complex, rich, and diverse world. But yeah, no, it's a situation that could have been at some points handled differently. You know, and basically this kind of highlights a lot of the issues that libertarians have with government, in the sense of where, you know, whether you think government should act or not act, what happens in practice. So even if government arguably may have the power to handle a situation, it oftentimes either acts too light or too strong, too early or too late, because you're just having one big response. There's not the same kind of deliberation when you have a lot of little discussions going on. And when you take a look at a lot of little micro answers, a lot of micro solutions, you see a lot more robust, much more dynamic solutions where people are responding quicker to changing circumstances and adapting much faster to changing situations. Okay, so it's not saying that, you know, you couldn't theorize, you couldn't imagine a perfect sort of coordinated response. I'm not arguing that that's not theoretically possible. But again, the criticism libertarians have isn't that can't happen, is that it just generally doesn't, because of the incentives and just sort of the nature of large institutions that are kind of absent feedback from other things, you know, from the feedback loop of consent. Okay, consent does a lot to give you feedback. Okay, that's why, you know, even in a personal relationship, I always like to use that example because I think it's the clearest, where when you're in a relationship with someone, you are in there with consent and they stick around as long as they feel like they're getting value out of that relationship. So they're going to give you feedback, okay? And then the ultimate feedback will be they leave if you are not providing value, and vice versa. Okay, you always have that out, and that kind of puts pressure on everyone to kind of constantly be assessing the situation, constantly thinking, how can I be better? How can I do better? And if you don't, it ends. Okay, the consent goes away. And when you see abuses become sort of more abusive, is oftentimes when that aura of consent begins to disappear, whether it's just because there's a dynamic where one person doesn't feel like they can leave, or they just kind of completely got detached from the fact that they can, or circumstances make it really hard to, for a variety of reasons. And that dynamic, when that threat, that overlooming aura of consent goes away, is when you start seeing things become less good. And again, that's sort of the context that larger institutions tend to exist in, because they have less feedback from the outside. That's essentially the fundamental sort of libertarian criticism from a sort of institutional point of view. Again, it doesn't mean that there aren't answers or some of the ideas on the table aren't good. The question is not whether actions should be taken, whether large actions should be taken. The question is who does it, who decides, is it done, is it coordinated through multiple institutions, through one institution? These are the actual rich discussions that libertarians are trying to get out there, that are trying to get inside the conversation in society, that ask much more substantive questions than people are asking, where basically it's, does government do it or not, instead of asking, does somebody else may do something and something else. It's not always do something or not do something. So I wanted to reflect on that. I do think this era of 2020, as difficult as has been and as unpredictable as it has been, has made people more acutely aware of these discussions and more acutely open to them. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for libertarians in 2020. And I think going forward, we're going to see, and crises don't come every time people are in a situation of crisis, people adapt, and oftentimes those adaptations result in people kind of doing things that they should have probably done earlier. So you're seeing a lot of businesses kind of adapt technologies, whatnot. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing sort of like, retail embracing sort of a food truck type business model, where you start seeing like, where basically instead of having you go to a crowded store where you can't really be socially distant, having like a truck that sells hardware that, shows up at different parts of the city here and there, with your order or something. Okay, basically you're gonna start seeing shifting business models that kind of adapt to sort of the real changes that are going to happen in our culture, where we're going to be looking for new ways to have leisure, new ways to exist, where we can mitigate some of these risks that we just didn't care about till now, and that's just reality, and that's fine. And that there's a lot of opportunity being part of that discussion and coming up with those solutions. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Do leave a comment where you're listening on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook, and I will share this out and about through the other social networks. And this is Alex Merced, current vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, at least for about the next month or so. And also just general, nice libertarian guy, I guess. And you can, again, always go to alexmerced.com to find everything that I do. Or you can go to libertarian101.com. So that way you guys can just learn about, so if you're new to libertarianism, that's a great place to just kind of learn the basics, get an appreciation for sort of the lay of the land of sort of what the word libertarian is usually associated with. At the end of the day, like, labels are labels. What matters is the discussion that we're having and sort of the move towards consent, a world based on consent and individual peace and things like that. So you guys have a great